We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner McNinch.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Suzanne, would you call the roll of the commission, please?
Yes. Chairman Wallace,
Here.
Vice Chairman Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Albert,
Here.
Commissioner Barnes,
Here.
Here, Commissioner Huff, Commissioner McNinch,
Here.
Commissioner Valentine,
Here.
and Commissioner Young.
I have not heard from Commissioner Young, and my understanding is that Commissioner Hubbs has court this morning and will be joining us later this afternoon. Is that correct from the department? That was the last I had seen. Okay. And would County Advisory Board members please stand and announce themselves?
Paul Dixon Clark. Steve Robinson Washoe. Mike Guaranteed Douglas. Gary Coleman, Bridgman County. Steve Martin, Flatline. Glenn Bunch, minimum. Rob Beamer, Carson City. Wayne Drake, Carson City. Joe Grimm, Bridgman. Scott Wilson, Lander. Long Harris, Lander. Jesse Weller, Line. Without a Lincoln.
Thank you and welcome. That will close agenda item number 1 and move to agenda item number 2, approval of the agenda. Chairman Wallace, for possible action, the commission will review the agenda and may take action to approve the agenda. The commission may remove items from the agenda, continue items for consideration, or take items out of order. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? Questions or comments on the agenda from the commission? Seeing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment, and we'll start in Reno. Public comment in Reno. Seeing none, public comment in Las Vegas. Are you there, Las Vegas? Apparently they're working on Las Vegas.
No public comment in Las Vegas. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or a motion.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, no public comment in Las Vegas.
Okay, thank you, Las Vegas.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner Valentine to approve the agenda as presented. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 7-0, with Commissioner Hubbs and Young absent. Agenda item number 3, I'm sorry. Member items, announcements, and correspondence. Chairman Wallace, informational. Commissioners may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. The commission will review and may discuss correspondence sent or received by the commission since the last regular meeting and may provide copies for the exhibit file. Commissioners may provide hard copies of their correspondence for the written record. Correspondence sent or received by Secretary Wasley may also be discussed. Items from the commission. Okay, seeing none, I actually have a copy of 2 of them here that must have been received by mail, but I received multiple emails regarding the cleanup of the Walker River, which I forwarded to the department, and I believe the rest of the commissioners then received. And that's all I have at this time. Is the department have anything, Director Rob? Okay. All right, seeing nothing further from the commission, we'll close agenda item number 3 and move to agenda item number 4. County advisory boards to manage wildlife member items, informational. CAB members may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action will be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Cabs?
I realize the commission has had busy and very full agendas, as well as the department trying to keep things going, but I will bring back up again that Clark County would like to work with the Department of Cab member, as well as Mr. Donnelly, on the use of muzzleloader handguns as part of a legal weapon for hunting. And at the earliest convenience, I'd like to start to work with the department on that. And I realize we've been busy. I'm just bringing it up again that there's still an appetite at Los Alamos, and I get reminded every meeting about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Further cab comments? Come on up.
Yeah, Sean Merlich, Lander County Cab. I'd just like to put our local on the radar with the state committee about our deer population and things that we're going to try to present to you guys as far as trying to bring our deer herd back. We've been talking a lot about the last year that I've been on it, 2 years, just cutting tags and stuff, and we don't feel like we're getting listened to. So we have some ideas that we'd like to bring to you, like maybe splitting our youth tags into half antelope, half deer, closing doe seasons completely. There's just some things we want to bring to you, but I just wanted to come and get on the radar. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Further cab comments? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close agenda item number 4. Move to agenda item number 5, approval of the minutes. Chairman Wallace for possible action. The commission minutes may be approved from the November 3rd and 4th, 2017 meeting. Has the commission had a chance to review the minutes? Questions or comments on the minutes? Okay. Seeing none, this is an action item. We'll take it out for public comment, and we'll start in Reno. Public comment on the minutes from November 3rd and 4th. Come on up, Rex.
Rex Flower speaking on behalf of myself. If you go to the website, there are no public, there's nothing there for the public to view on your minutes. It gives the very first page, which shows who was in attendance, but there's nothing in there about comments or what was done at the meeting. I was a member of that meeting. I believe I had comments there. I can't review what I said. So I would ask you to delay any action on this until they become public record. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex. Further public comment in Reno? Seeing none, public comment in Las Vegas? Las Vegas, can you hear me?
Chairman,
Yes.
this is Las Vegas.
Yes.
We've got like a 30-second delay.
Okay.
So no public comment in Las Vegas.
All right. Thank you. I'll try and give you a little more time.
Thank you.
All right. Hearing no public comment in Las Vegas, I'll bring it back to the commission for a possible motion or just
Mr.
further
Chairman?
discussion. But I think,
Since the minutes weren't provided to the public, I agree with Mr. Flowers that it needs to be tabled. I don't think we can vote on it today. The public needs to get it at the same time as the commission in order for the
okay,
vote to take place.
that's what I was going to recommend to the commission. So,
I did have it on there, but I made corrections, so I think that's why they were up for just maybe one day. Okay, so I'll repost them.
okay. So with that, I do believe we will table this until the commission meeting in March in Laughlin. Further questions from the commission on this? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close agenda item number 5. Move to agenda item number 6. And we're going to give the department here 5 minutes to have a discussion with the DAG and see if we have our appellant here.
Can we just ask, is Mr. Sutton here? So I believe we can skip this item.
All right. Good? Okay. All right, so with that, we will skip agenda item number 6. Questions or comments from the commission? Tax Stockton, this is an action item. Can we just table it, or what's the process here?
You can just skip it.
And just skip it? Okay. With that, we will skip agenda item number 6, and we will move to agenda item number 7, Commission Policy 26, reestablishing, introducing, transplanting, and managing pioneering Rocky Mountain elk. Second reading, Commissioner Administrative Procedures, Regulations and Policy Committee Chairman David McNinch for possible action. The commission will conduct a second reading of Commission Policy 26 and may take action to officially revise and adopt the policy. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Commission Policy 26, we did make some recommended changes as a commission at the last meeting. In November, there were 3 proposed modifications incorporating concepts of private land interests and some public access. Those have all been incorporated into the new version and to what we have in front of us today. And this is the second reading, so if everybody's on board, then we'd take action to finalize that. But the changes that we requested at the last meeting have been incorporated. I think we're good to go unless there's additional questions.
Questions from the commission? Okay, seeing none, I'll take it out to the public in Reno on agenda item number 7, Commission Policy 26. Seeing no public comment in Reno, public comment in Las Vegas.
Agenda item number 7?
Yes.
Yes.
Questions from the commission?
No comment from Las Vegas. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no public comment in Reno or Las Vegas, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion or a motion. Commissioner McNinch?
Oh, did.
Oh.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll make a motion that we approve Commission Policy 26, reestablishing, introducing, transplanting, and managing pioneering Rocky Mountain elk as presented.
Yeah.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by, I believe, Mr. Olmberg, I'm sorry, having a moment there, to approve as presented. Any questions by the commission? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 7-0. With that, we'll close agenda item number 7 and move to agenda item number 8. Commission Policy 3, Appeals, second reading, Commissioner and APRP Committee Chairman David McNinch for possible action. Commission will conduct a second reading of Commission Policy 3 and may take action to officially revise and adopt the policy. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Policy 3, Appeals. There was just some cleanup language, some editorial type stuff through the committee and through the commission. This is the second reading, and the committee has recommended to reaffirm. The commission did support that last time, moved it to the second reading. So I think that it's where it's at, and it's just a formality. If there's any changes, that's fine, but I think we're good to go.
Questions from the commission on Policy 3? Seeing none, I'll take it out for public comment on agenda item number 8, Commission Policy 3 in Reno. And seeing no public comment in Reno, public comment in Las Vegas?
No public comment in Las Vegas. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. With no public comment in Las Vegas, we'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or a motion. Commissioner McNinch.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Commission Policy 3, Appeals as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch with a second by Vice Chairman Johnston to approve Commission Policy 3 as presented. Questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 7-0. We'll close agenda item number 8 and move to agenda item number 9, Commission Policy 66, Management and Use of Wildlife Management Areas, second reading. Commission and APRP Committee Chairman David McNinch for possible action. The commission will conduct a second reading of Commission Policy 66 and may take action to officially revise and adopt the policy. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Policy 66, Management and Use of Wildlife Management Areas. This is the second reading. At the last commission meeting, we considered some amendments that were made from what was presented by the committee, having to do with smoothing out some what could be perceived as divisive language and kind of broadening the concepts that were presented in the previous policy. Kind of smoothing the playing field with regards to non-consumptive and consumptive users while still maintaining the original intent of the designation for those wildlife management areas, which are for specific uses based on the funding that's provided that made those possible. So with that, I think it's the policy is where it needs to be, and if there's any questions.
Questions from the commission? Seeing none, it's an action item. I'll take it out to the public in Reno for public comment on Commission Policy 66. Seeing none in Reno, public comment in Las Vegas.
No public comment in Las Vegas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, thank you. So I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or motion on Commission Policy 66. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion that we approve Commission Policy 66, Management and Use of Wildlife Management Areas as presented.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch with a second by Commissioner Valentine to approve policy number 66 as presented. Questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 7-0. That will close agenda item number 9 and move to commission item number 10. Commission Policy 51, Wayne E. Kirch Conservation Award, first reading. Commissioner and APRP Committee Chairman David McNinch for possible action. The commission will conduct a first reading of Commission Policy 51 and may take action to revise the policy. The commission may advance the policy to a second reading for possible adoption at a future meeting. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the first reading. The recommendation from the committee, there were some updated language, some editorial stuff, and some updated language, just kind of making the, making it consistent with our language and other policies, making it new, and let me see here. There was also an effort to kind of expand the advertising, if you will, of the award, that it's out there, and try to engage using some of the new technologies, or the social media type stuff, so we can reach a broader audience and letting people know that it's out there. So pretty basic stuff, just making it new. I think that, I don't know if there's any questions.
Questions from the commission or comments? Commissioner Valentine.
Just a quick comment. This year's Wayne E. Kirch Awards was the most that I've participated in, and I think we had seven applicants this year, 6 or 7.
6, I believe.
Yeah, so.
Further comments or questions from the commission? Seeing none, this is an action item. I take it out for public comment on Commission Policy 51 for public comment in Reno.
Paul Dixon Clark. I've been on the Wayne E. Kirch Evaluation Board for the last 6 or 7 years. And it was brought up by one of our CAB members, and we had a discussion that a lot of the packages that come in really kind of display a lifetime of achievements, and very little emphasis is put on by the award for the last year, which is what the award is supposed to be for. What have you done for me in the last year? So the recommendation that came from Clark is that we either more strictly enforce in the packages, it's nice to know what people have done, but we really want to know what they've done this year and really highlight that, because some packages that I've read are 95% history and 5% new. Is either make sure that we're a little more discerning on when we get packages and make sure people understand that, or we change it to be more of a lifetime award, because some of the people who are getting it in lifetime sense have really earned it. Don't get me wrong, but we've tended to make decisions based on some of these packages, in my viewpoint, that really look more at a lifetime of achievement rather than the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Further public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I'll close public comment in Reno. Public comment in Las Vegas?
No public comment in Las Vegas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Las Vegas. Bring it back to the commission for further discussion or a motion. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion that we move Commission Policy 51, Wayne E. Kirch Conservation Award, to a second reading at the March Commission meeting as it's presented.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner Barnes to move Commission Policy 51 to a second reading at the March meeting as presented today. Questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 7-0. With that, we'll close agenda item number 10 and move to agenda item number 11, reports informational. Agenda item 11A, Wildlife Heritage Account Report, Deputy Director Liz O'Brien. The report will be provided on the funds available, interest and principal for expenditure from the Wildlife Heritage Account in the upcoming year. Ms. O'Brien?
Thank you, Chairman Wallace and members of the commission. There is a one-page report in your material titled Heritage Trust Fund Interest and Funding Summary by Year. We have $887,474 available for distribution. This is the highest amount when looking back over 10 years and is up from the prior year report of $785,913. That is an increase of $101,560 in funds available to spend this year from last year. That's all I have. Is there any questions?
Questions for Ms. O'Brien? I don't see any. Thank you. Agenda item 11B, Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Midwinter Conference. Secretary Wasley and Commissioner McNinch, a report from the conference held in San Diego will be provided by the attendees. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I wish Tony were here to help walk through a little bit of it, but I know Deputy Director Rob was there, so he can help keep me on track. But there were a lot of interesting things at this meeting. It seems, you know, a lot of the time when you're in the commissioners forum or commissioner directors forums, you talk a lot about the sociology, the social aspects of things. That's what a lot of it's about. But this time what hit me were the, and those things continue to, you know, are still prevalent. Most states are still dealing with trail cams, drones, shed antlers at some level. Every state's dealing with all those things. Nothing's different, a little higher pitch than normal. So I think that the urgency, what we might be feeling here in a sense to have those conversations and to discuss them, we're not unique. It's occurring all across the West. And I can tell you that where we might differ in one place, we're very similar in others with a lot of different states. So there's a lot going on. Utah took some heat for their shed antler closure last year because it affected however many states there are. 7, I think, 6 or 7 that touch Utah, and so they got kind of a little bit of a ribbing throughout the conference for the impacts. But the one thing I think probably the best thing to do at some point, I'd like to ask the department if we can get some presentations to talk about CWD, chronic wasting disease, even though it's not here in Nevada. Some of the things that are happening with it, really, there's some real progressive stuff going on with it and some real interesting conversations that are occurring with it.
There's a lot of studies going on, and there were studies involving macaques, monkeys that are very similar to humans, and they contracted CWD after eating CWD meat, and there's indications that swine have the ability to transmit, can shed the prion that creates it. So there's some real interesting science that's going on, some real interesting research that I think is real relevant. These are all relatively new things, and I'm not saying these things to create fear or concern, but certainly there's some things that are happening out there that I think this board would benefit from hearing a little more in detail and having a conversation. Jack, did I cross any lines there with the what we were hearing down there?
No.
Yeah. There tends to be some intensity depending on the soil types, especially if you have more volcanic type soils. Apparently, they're more conducive to persisting, some of the prions and stuff persisting in the soil, the transmission. There is indication that prions can be transferred through plants. So there's all sorts of things happening out there. So it's not just this contact thing that's happening. There's indications that some of these plants are able to take up these the prions that cause chronic wasting into the plant material, and of course you've got animals foraging on it, and that could be a potential transmission. So it's very dynamic and very complex, and I think that we'd benefit from hearing some about that. There were a lot of conversations. There was another interesting thing that I'd like to hear about from our fisheries folks at some point, where they're testing a process where they use genetics and breeding of fish to get rid of fish in stream environments. So we've typically gone in and removed those fish through some kind of chemical means, and what they're doing is they're actually breeding them out of the population. So they're what they refer to it as, Jack, the YY chromosome test, where they're literally breeding sterile fish, and of course then they can't breed, and over time they just disappear. They age out and they die, and then rather than going in and trying to do all this removal. So that had big ramifications for probably cost and efficiencies, and certainly a little healthier way of doing things in some sense. So I think that would be an interesting thing to hear about a little bit and see what's going on with that. There was a lot of conversation about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This is the Blue Ribbon panels, the continuation of the Blue Ribbon panel that we talked about before. The commission has signed a resolution in support of that effort to broaden the funding to support wildlife management and wildlife conservation. And with that, the legislature also passed a resolution in support of the concept. The original bill had to be scrubbed for some technical issues. There were some clarification that needed to be provided. Over the last several months, a lot of work has gone into rebuilding that act and that bill. It has been reintroduced in mid-December, and the original supporters, a couple of them backed away from it, but it brought a lot more people on board. So it's got a very broad bipartisan support, and the clarifications that were made were things such as, that this is to supplement funding, not supplant it. Clarification that it includes fish. Clarifies it's a sub-account of Pittman-Robertson of an existing account. Clarifies the use of funds. It also modifies the state match requirement, and the 2/3 population, 1/3 land area changed to half and half, which for Nevada means that we would get an increase. If this were to go through, it would benefit us to the tune of an estimated $27 million a year. I think that's the number that Tony gave to me. And it added flexibility on how or what you would have to match, how you would be able to match. So it's a new and improved version, and it's certainly got a life, and the marketing and the branding are very much, which Director Wassley is a major part of. Everything's very much in place, and I think that there's a lot of optimism that this thing can progress and for the state of Nevada. And Liz, help me with the numbers, but $27 million a year is nearly doubles the opportunities here in Nevada. So it's a huge number, and I can't imagine the things that can be done in the state with that kind of annual support. So it's very exciting still, and it is all based off the Wildlife Action Plan still, and I think everything ties together, and I'm very hopeful that we all get to be a part of that legacy. I think it's a pretty amazing thing. So, Jack, was there anything else I missed on that?
You covered a lot of things I had down. I also attended the conference along with Director Wassley, and as with all the conferences we attend like this, there's a lot of interesting stuff, and Dave covered most of it that I was going to go over with chronic wastings and other items. But the interaction you get with other agency and agency personnel is invaluable. I had an opportunity to meet Stratford Laird. Some of our staff knows that gentleman. He's the assistant director or deputy director in California. And I went over multiple items of ways we're working with California that he was unaware of, and he shared some of the ones that he's aware of. And as a result of that, we decided in the May time frame we're going to have a meeting, high-level individuals from Cal Fish and Game and us, because we have a great shared resource in bi-straight sage grouse, our mule deer, black bears, antelope. We have a lot of things in common with them, and there's a lot of ways we are currently working together that we need to be aware of. But like we're working with their DNA specialists and their crime lab people to do genetic testing on wildlife, whether we're going to work with them trying to figure out where the pike in Cummins Lake came from, because that's of interest to them, because they've had to eradicate pike in the past also. So we have multiple issues that are a concern to both states that we are working together on, and some he's aware of, some I'm not aware of. So that was a great plus to attending a conference like this. The other thing that really interested me that Dave didn't mention was they have an R3 conference in conjunction with Midwinter WAFWA, and the items that were discussed there that other states are doing for recruitment, retention, reactivation, there's multiple things that we need to review. Oregon has really been progressive in this and uses social media to a great advantage. They have 4 times the followers on Facebook we do now, but how did they get there? And we can learn from them. How they use Facebook Live, how they use all these other things that touch millennials. They had a bunch of demographics of age groups that are participating in wildlife activities, hunting and fishing, and what age groups were missing and how we can further outreach to those age groups. Zebco, the president of Zebco, a fishing tackle company, gave a great presentation on how industry recognizes R3 efforts, and they are doing focus groups around the country, studying demographics, studying what type of communication we need to put out there and what type of messages we need to put out there to try to grow our base. By putting with our license rollout, I really thought that we need to show a father standing on the side of a bank of a pond with his son and a daughter, and that would speak to, get your kid out fishing, and it would remind an adult of what it was like to go fishing with their kid. The president of Zebco said, yeah, this is what we all thought, but those are the people that are participating now, and that shows the age group, young kids want to go fishing. The older you get, you go fishing, but that group in the middle is not. And they said if you show that picture, they did the focus groups, you show that picture of a father and a son standing on the side of the bank, that tells a millennial, boy, that's boring sitting there watching a bobber. And you need to make fishing a part of an outdoor experience, not the outdoor experience. And so they have ad campaigns showing millennials out at a campfire doing different activities and fishing just a part of that outdoor experience, not the focus of their outdoor experience. And those are the type of messages we need to explore to figure out how we can further our R3 efforts. So just things like that at these conferences and being able to talk to other states on what their successes are and what we all try to come up with ideas, but sometimes the best idea is the one you steal from somebody else and use it. So that's the benefit of these conferences. I think Dave covered most of the stuff I had down.
Thank you, Deputy Director Rob. Anything further?
I'll throw one more crazy. It's hard to see if this is on. So I will throw out one more thing, and it just goes to show you that you just can't keep on it enough. The Wyoming legislature required, as a form of mitigation for their oil and gas industry, required collection of sage grouse eggs for hatching as a form of mitigation. And I think anybody that's been around sage grouse, you know, that's full speed into the ground in my eyes, and that's why we rely on our departments, and you know, we have to continue to be vigilant, and we have to continue to push the message. That's not a good way of handling things. Personally, in my mind, it just seems like a total failure, and you know, there's other ways of dealing with stuff, and I think that we've come a long ways with how we develop our conservation plans with, you know, animals and creatures, birds like a sage grouse. But you know, we have to keep our eye on that kind of stuff. That's just not the best way to handle you know, conservation. And I thought that was real interesting, especially coming from Wyoming, who's always seemed to be a kind of a, you know, kind of a lead in some of that stuff, especially when it came to sage grouse, and it just looked like a step backwards. And I can tell you firsthand that you know, that there's a lot of folks that were kind of like, where did that come from? So anyway, I thought I'd throw that out as just an example of, you know, why we got to keep on our toes with stuff and help prevent stuff like that from happening. There's other ways and better ways of handling things. So,
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner McNinch. With that, we'll close agenda item 11B, move to agenda item number 11C. Department Activity Report. Secretary Wasley, report will be provided on Nevada Department of Wildlife activities. Deputy Director Rob, are you filling in for?
Chairman, I'll be reading that today. Tony left me his typed out list, and so I'll read that for you all today.
Go ahead, Ms. O'Brien. Thank you.
And I'll begin with the Game Division. The Game Division provided data to the Nevada Department of Transportation for incorporation into their ongoing assessment of highway safety hazards involving vehicle collisions. The Department of Transportation has developed mathematical models using collision data, and the Game Division provided 272,000 radio telemetry locations that occur within 1 mile of a highway to assist in validating the risk models. A lack of telemetry locations in some areas corresponds with a lack of marked animals, but areas with many telemetry locations may be useful in identifying suitable future crossings or exclusionary features. And I apologize if I sound a little rough here. I'm getting a cold. Over 1,000 sage grouse wings were analyzed during the annual sage grouse wing bee held in Winnemucca on December 7th, 2017. Production values were estimated at 1.05 chicks per hen, which is considered low and well below the long-term average of 1.58 chicks per hen. Male attendance at Lex is expected to decrease in 2018 and potentially 2019. We continue to work with the Colville Confederated Tribes in Washington to acquire Miriam's turkeys for translocation to the Toye Range in central Nevada. 22 birds have been moved so far this winter, and another 50 to 100 more are expected. Releases are targeting Iowa and Boone Canyons in this mountain range to augment turkeys released in the Toye Range last year. The Colville tribe in Washington reported on the most recent movements and survival of pronghorn, that were translocated from Nevada in early fall 2017. There have been 3 mortalities since translocation, including one that had to be euthanized upon arrival. Over 2/3 of the translocated pronghorn have remained on the land managed by the tribe, although the remaining 30% have made forays off of the reservation to adjacent public and private lands surrounding the Colville tribal lands. Additional translocations of turkeys and quail are also planned for implementation this winter. 50 turkeys are also expected to be provided by the state of Utah within the next week, which will be released at Docks Pass in Lincoln County. This release is designed to augment a release of turkeys from 2 years ago. 150 mountain quail were obtained from Oregon for release in Nevada this winter. 100 quail will be released at Mason Valley, and another 50 will be released in Jersey Canyon within the Fish Creek Mountains. And now I'll move to fisheries. Through the end of 2017, the department's statewide AIS program has completed over 26,000 watercraft inspections and approximately 950 decontaminations. The majority of those on watercraft exiting on the Colorado River system. With the end of the boating season, watercraft inspection stations in northern Nevada are closed, but the Alamo Roadside Station on U.S. Highway 93 and inspection stations at Lake Mead and Lake Mojave will continue to operate through the winter months. NDOW used approximately 35 contract staff, including seasonal stations, to supplement department personnel in 2017. Willow Creek Reservoir in Elko County suffered a catastrophic failure of one of the outlet valves in early November, which resulted in rapid dewatering of the entire reservoir. Eastern Region staff attempted fish salvage, but the sudden drop in elevation made the shoreline inaccessible because of muddy conditions. The dam is owned by Barrick, and we recently met them for an update. They hope to begin repairs by early February, which will require replacing the entire outlet works, repairs to the outlet tunnel, and possibly resurfacing the dam face and abutments with Shot Creek. Whether the reservoir can be restocked this spring is dependent on both the speed of repairs and runoff conditions from what is shaping up to be a pretty poor winter. Monitoring after the draining of Willow Creek Reservoir found live fish in the outflow stream below the dam, and we were able to salvage 4,000 crappie and a handful of channel catfish and largemouth bass. We were able to move 1,100 crappie to rye patch and 2,900 to wild horse. There were additional sport fish below the reservoir, but freezing conditions prevented any additional salvage. A number of habitat projects for fisheries improvement have been completed in the western region this winter, including at Sparks Marina, Rye Patch, and Chimney Reservoirs. Work at both Topaz Lake and Lahontan Reservoir is ongoing. These projects were funded through the Habitat Conservation Fee Program. And now I'll move to Habitat Division. Construction has been completed on a wetland enhancement project at the Key Pittman WMA. NDOW partnered with Ducks Unlimited on this project to improve water delivery and rehabilitate portions of the north units to create more uniform wetland depths. This project enhanced approximately 40 acres of wetland and upland habitat on the WMA. Habitat Division staff have been working with land management agencies and partnering sportsmen organizations to pool resources to address 2017 fire rehabilitation demands. While greater information will be supplied in the project update PowerPoint, we are expecting that all seeding will be completed by mid-February. Over the past year, the Habitat Division has worked with stakeholders and partners in wildlife and wildland conservation in an initiative to develop a framework for guiding future habitat management efforts. The results of this effort are captured in a strategic habitat framework document that will assist in depicting and selecting priority habitat projects in Nevada. The Sierra Front Winter Mule Deer Habitat Improvement Project, funded through Heritage Account funds, has supported 5 different volunteer projects on recent wildfire sites in proximity to Reno. The projects have resulted in approximately 78 acres being planted with bitterbrush and pine tree seedlings, as well as the dispersal of bitterbrush, grass, wildflower, and sagebrush seeds. The Habitat Division continues our involvement as a cooperating agency in Nevada test and training range withdrawal, renewal, and expansion legislation, EIS. In the southern region, as well as the Fallon Naval Air Station withdrawal, renewal, and expansion in the north. Throughout the processes, we have provided comment and recommendations in consideration of wildlife habitat values, infrastructure investments, and associated recreational impacts. And now I'll move to law enforcement. Numbers are still being compiled for the 2017 boating season, but preliminarily, Nevada saw 39 boat accidents in 2017 involving 56 vessels. 14 people were injured with 3 fatalities. This number will be updated as final reports are submitted, and these numbers do not include a large number of accidents that NDOW game wardens responded to and investigated on the Arizona side of the Colorado River, Lake Mead, and Lake Mojave. Eastern Region game wardens recently traveled to Twin Falls, Idaho on 2 separate big game poaching investigations. This trip resulted in complete confessions in both cases. One involved the illegal killing of a mountain lion near Jar Bridge without a tag or license. The other involved the killing of a deer in far northeast Nevada by a juvenile with a Utah tag. Suspects in both cases are Idaho residents. A moose was found illegal killed in the Jar Bridge area right after Christmas. We had moose killed illegally in both 2015 and 16, but both were accidental kills that were self-reported by cow elk hunters. In this more recent case, the moose appears to have been killed intentionally with the head and some portions of meat removed. Several sportsman organizations and individuals have stepped up with donations to raise the reward money to $10,000 for information about the poaching. Nevada has a very small but growing moose population, primarily in Elko County. Poaching incidents like this can have a profound negative effect on such a small population. A California man pled guilty November 14th to conspiracy to possess an unlawfully killed big game animal without a valid tag. Alan Edward Berryessa of Grass Valley, California, was subsequently sentenced on January 9th in the 6th District Court in Winnemucca to pay a $5,000 civil penalty in addition to administrative fines. Berryessa had been the subject of a residency fraud investigation after applying for Nevada tags for many years. Berryessa drew tags for and killed a California bighorn in Humboldt County and a desert bighorn in Mineral County. Charges similar to the Humboldt County charges are also pending in Mineral County. Berryessa will also face license revocation, and he forfeited both sheep heads. This case came from our Wildlife Investigations Program, which recently saw the filing of 2 regional investigator positions so that we now have a wildlife investigator in each of our 3 regions. The Law Enforcement Division will be conducting another recruitment and general hiring process in upcoming weeks. Recruitment and retention continue to be a problem, as we recently had 2 new wardens resign to pursue other law enforcement jobs. With retirements and promotions, we are now back to 7 vacancies out of a field force of 31 field wardens. An Ely Big Game Guide was convicted January 24th in Tonopah Justice Court for guiding on U.S. Forest Service lands without a special use permit. The guide will pay $640 in fines and received a suspended jail sentence of 10 days. This guide has prior convictions for the same violation dating back in 2011 and is currently under suspension of 2018 license privileges for civil contract matters. And now I'll go to Wildlife Diversity Division. Wildlife Diversity staff continue to work with the Bureau of Land Management on removal of illegal pitfall traps in southern Nevada. By our estimates, approximately 400 traps have been destroyed or removed by NDOW in Nye and Clark counties. The Benz family has self-reported to the BLM that they have removed all of their traps from the Amagrosa Valley, estimated at about 700 according to previous statements. BLM is hiring a temporary crew for 4 weeks from mid-February through mid-March to verify trap removal and to search for other traps and remove them. TNC has also offered volunteer support. January is the time of the year when the annual winter raptor survey is conducted. Diversity biologists and volunteers surveyed approximately 70 road and boating routes from January 3rd to the 17th, with resurvey opportunities later in the month. This time frame coincides with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer National Midwinter Bald Eagle Survey, ensuring that Nevada is able to contribute data to that effort as well. There are preliminary reports of increased observations, with some routes detecting as many as 100 birds. Southern Region Supervising Biologist Joe Barnes was recently featured in a Las Vegas Review-Journal story discussing bald eagle surveys at Lake Mead, where 137 bald eagles and 5 golden eagles were counted, the highest number observed in the last 5 years. Christmas bird counts were conducted by staff at Steptoe and Snake Valleys. There were 1,940 birds representing 43 species recorded in Steptoe Valley, while Snake Valley produced 3,274 birds, comprising 59 species. And now I'll go to Conservation Education Division. The Conservation Education staff has been front and center working on the rollout of the new license system, website, and vendor support. Customer service calls, emails, social media posts have all been of huge importance in improving the customer experience. Nevada Department of Wildlife partnered with the Wild Sheep Foundation to hold the annual Youth Wild Conservation Experience and Career Day. NDOW staff presented to 444 students on careers and wildlife-related fields and coordinated volunteer instructors to run stations designed to excite and inspire youth from any age to get excited about wildlife, the outdoors, and conservation. The Wild Sheep Foundation funded buses from Western Nevada schools, including Swope Middle School, Jesse Beck Elementary, Alpine High School, Donner Springs Elementary, and Academy of Arts, Careers, and Technology High School. The Saturday event at the YWCE was open to the public, and 956 youth came through the stations for a total exceeding 1,400 youth in attendance over the 3 years. Southern Region Wildlife Education completed an interpretive display at the Clark County Wetlands Park. An interpretive program with owls at Doral Academy Red Rock Canyon Elementary Gate program was a huge success. Staff also conducted a desert wildlife outreach program at the Lake Mead National Recreation Area Visitor Center to a full class of 50 students. Headquarters and Western Region staff coordinated numerous media stories with local news stations about increased bear activity in the late fall and winter, giving Nevada residents tips on what they can do to keep bears away. Western Region Wildlife Education and Urban Wildlife Coordinators presented at the January Sierra Nevada Forum in Carson City to 185 people. The excitement for this presentation has led to upcoming presentation requests and media coverage. And now I'll move to the Data Information and Technology Division, DATS, also known as DATS. NDOW rolled out our new agency management, AMS, on January 1st, 2018, and has been working around the clock with our contractor, Calcami Enterprises, to ensure the system operates correctly. Although some technical issues from the transition still remain, both NDOW and Calcami are dealing with these lingering issues as quickly as possible. Online and in-person licensing and vessel registration transactions are taking place as expected. NDOW and Calcami visited nearly all of our licensed agents to deliver and install the new point-of-sale system. Although some technical difficulties were reported regarding the new license printers, those issues have been resolved and license sales are taking place. Calcami is working on developing additional training materials to ensure our agents can operate the system effectively. NDOW is working to provide additional phone and email support to customers with questions regarding the new system as we continue to manage the transition to AMS. The spring turkey hunt application period opened as scheduled on January 19th through our online system. Applications are proceeding as expected, and we look forward to opening the non-resident guided deer hunt application period as scheduled. And now I'll move to the Director's Office. The Director's Office continues to provide guidance and support to the rollout of the new system and the license simplification efforts. The Legislative Commission met on December 19th, 2017, and approved Commission General Regulation 472, License Simplification. The regulation implements the hunting and fishing license simplification structure approved during the 79th legislative session in Senate Bill 511. It revises provisions relating to governing the operation, ownership, registration, and numbering of vessels, and the issuance and renewal of licenses, tags, and permits to engage in hunting and fishing and the payment of fees for those licenses, tags, and permits. The regulation became effective December 19th, 2017. The department held a leadership conference this month. About 120 employees were provided professional development training about sound governance, polarity, human dimensions, communication and customer service, and law enforcement emotional survival. The director, deputy director, and other employees attended the WAFWA midwinter meeting in San Diego this month. Chris Vasey attended the R3 workshops while at the meeting. The Western Governors Association Sage Grouse Task Force has stepped up meetings due to the notice of intent around land use plan amendments and secretarial orders dealing with mitigation. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Questions or comments from the commission? Okay, thank you. We'll close agenda item 11C, move to agenda item 11D, litigation report, Deputy Attorney General Joshua Woodbury. Or
Actually, this is
Mr.
Brian
Stockton.
Stockton, Deputy Attorney General. I'm going to handle that one. You have the litigation report. The only change is on the last item number 6, Smith versus Wakeling. The case was filed in California and has stayed in California pending proceedings in Nevada. There is a branch of that case, though, concerning the issue of whether a Nevada state agency can be sued in California state court. And that's being handled by our Solicitor General. That's been appealed to the California Court of Appeals and summarily rejected, and so now it's in the California Supreme Court. Since it's a U.S. Supreme Court case, it has to go to the U.S. Supreme Court to get reversed. And so that part of the case is on track to do that. So that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Questions for Mr. Stockton? Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I might be showing a whole lot of ignorance by even asking this, but on the United States et al. Versus the Truckee Carson Irrigation District, there was a finding that the tribe is entitled to recoup a total of 8,300 acre-feet of water for past diversions, I guess, or past, they're owed the 83. With the amount of water we received last year, why couldn't we have provided 8,300 acre-feet of water through that process and called it good? I mean, am I really overthinking this, or? I mean, there were 1.5 million acre-feet of water that they had to go out in the middle of nowhere because, you know, there was no room for it where it was headed. Right. The problem with that one is NDOW is only involved for a limited degree. The over diversions were by the Truckee Carson Irrigation District, which we get our water from Truckee Carson Irrigation District. And this is just background. The only reason we were involved is because we own the water that NDOW owns that mostly goes to the Carson Lake and Pasture, and we didn't want the court using NDOW's water to pay back the water debt of Truckee Carson Irrigation District. Now, the reason the floodwaters couldn't be used, you know, we'd have to talk to the federal water master, but generally what it is, those floodwaters are not considered anybody's water. So Truckee Carson Irrigation District can't say, well, you got all this extra water from the flood, because it's not TCID's water, right? So TCID is going to have to find this water and leave it in the river so it can go down to Pyramid Lake in order to pay back the over diversions. Because there was evidence in the trial that they were diverting water and using it on lands that weren't entitled to water under the decree. So it's just the way water is accounted, and I think in this case, because they diverted water they weren't entitled to, they have to take water they are entitled to and send it down the river to the tribe. Is that clear? Does that answer your question? It does. I appreciate it. I guess I was sarcastically pointing out that there probably could have been a way to, you know, I mean, we knew there was a tremendous amount of water that was going to be coming back through there. I don't know. It just seemed like the system's broke, is what it boils down to.
Further
I'm not
questions
sure I can
for
disagree with that.
Dag Stockton?
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further questions or comments, we'll close agenda item 11D, and we'll move to agenda item number 12, Nevada Department of Wildlife Project Updates, Secretary Wasley Informational. Commission has requested that the department provide regular project updates for ongoing projects and programs as appropriate based on geography and timing of meetings. These updates are intended to provide additional detail in addition to the summaries provided as part of the regular department activity report, and are intended to educate the commission and the public as to the department's ongoing duties and responsibilities. Mr. Janay.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the commission. We're going to give you a wildfire update from the 2017 wildfire season. We're going to kind of tag team this thing. We'll go through what we experienced this last year. I'll give you the totals and maps depicting that. Chief of Game, Brian Wakeling, will give you an overview of what that means to the wildlife that were impacted. And then Lee Turner, habitat ecologist in the Habitat Division, will give you an overview of what efforts we're working on as far as wildfire rehabilitation. So this is a picture you've seen before. This was one of the larger fires just north of Battle Mountain in the Sheep Creek Range. Pretty drastic this year what we saw, some of the sizes of the fires, over 200,000 acres. Looking at what was lost, those areas, those polygons in red, are the fires that occurred this year. Overall, we lost approximately 1.2 million acres to wildfire this year. Looking over the term of from 96 to 2017, it's about our third highest fire year. We have seen 1.8, 1.3 in the past, but this was definitely a very high year. When you look at the distribution of the fires across the regions, in the eastern region, there's a number of fires there. There were many more starts that BLM got out or were so small that they aren't depicted on this graph or on this table, but when you look at it, it was almost an equal distribution of burned acres across the regions in the western and eastern region, approximately 600,000 in each of those. There was a small amount that were burned in the southern region this year. They actually escaped much of the fire loss. So that's the eastern region, and then here looking at the western region, again, approximately 600,000 acres of wildfire, and some of those, you know, again, approaching over 100,000 acres. The Long Valley here north of town, and then that fire out there, name's escaping me, near Fernley. Those were some pretty large fires. So definitely a tough year. We're going to give you an overview now of, you know, what this means to wildlife. This is a picture off of that Sheep Creek fire. Water development, you know, oftentimes people don't think that that's an impact associated with fire, but, you know, at times we have to go back in and you get units that'll melt down in those high temperatures, and it's just one more indirect impact to the wildlife associated with fire. But Brian Wakeling will now take over on wildfire impact.
Thank you, Alan. Brian Wakeling, the Game Division Administrator, Nevada Department of Wildlife. When we look at game species specifically, you know, the scientific literature gives us a sense of what we can expect. And for people unfamiliar with a lot of the sagebrush ecosystems in much of the other parts of the country, fire can be a very beneficial tool. Even wildfires are often very beneficial to wildlife. But when we look at Nevada and we look at how the sagebrush ecosystem is affected, it's much more of a mixed bag. And so in general, you know, what we can expect is that You can see browse get stimulated. You could see some herbaceous material get stimulated. And whenever you can get a mosaic, a lot of times that's very favorable for wildlife. It does promote changes in the ecosystem. A lot of times we get a lot of very climax communities that are not favorable to wildlife, and we can kind of reset that a little bit. An example with this photograph here is elk often will use habitat that's proximal to some of the places where they can still get cover, especially from thermal cover, but they still need to be able to access parts that are not just pure pinyon juniper. Pinyon juniper makes poor habitat as far as feeding habitat goes, but on the other hand, it can be very favorable for some other aspect. So wildlife often use a mosaic of habitats. As I mentioned, Nevada's a little bit different, and even here, what happens with a fire, it depends. Oftentimes, elk can be favorably impacted. They can even take advantage of some cheatgrass at some points in time. But a lot of times what we see is a lot of those species, cheatgrass in particular, but not just that, but we also have things like medusa head that come in, and those can be very, very detrimental in the long run. They're not forage that actually is good throughout the growing season. It's a very short, brief period of time where it's of any nutritional value, and then it dries out, and then it can be part of that cycle where it creates those fires and creates some pretty severe ones. And so a lot of times, depending upon how rapidly we're able to work with the land management agencies and get in and be part of a rehabilitation program, that really affects how well that piece of land is going to recover, and not only how well it's going to recover, but how it's going to deal with the next fire that comes in. So depending on, again, looking at Nevada, looking at where you are when a fire occurs, a lot of the effects can be mitigated. If you're high elevation above 7,000 feet, fire often is beneficial. It can, in those areas, you can wind up with some reinvigoration of things like browse species, bitterbrush, serviceberry, ceanothus. These are the kinds of species that browse-dependent species such as bighorn sheep can really capitalize on. On the other hand, when you get down at some of the lower elevations, or even in some of those higher elevations, the lower elevations you definitely deal with cheatgrass, but some of those higher elevation stands, the Carson Range, for instance, is one of the examples we're using here. You wind up with the potential for that medusa head to come in and create problems. And those are not long-term beneficial to wildlife. So looking at what happened in 2017 and just looking at a couple of the species that are probably the most affected by fire, mule deer are one of the ones that are hugely affected by those areas. And so you overlay the fires that Alan showed earlier, and you overlay that on mule deer habitat. It certainly didn't affect the bulk of mule deer habitat, but the bulk of the fires certainly occurred within mule deer habitat. And when you look at the kind of habitat that mule deer are using, those crucial winter range, just over half of those fires occurred within mule deer range, and a quarter of those fires occurred on that crucial winter range. And so that's some of the stuff that can have a huge effect on our overwinter survival. A winter so far that we've seen this year hasn't been hugely detrimental to our mule deer populations, but we're not seeing the precipitation we usually see. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. If we have a winter like last winter, where you have more significant effects on with winter accumulations, this can be a hugely detrimental effect on our mule deer populations. Looking at the area right around the Reno area, just kind of to point out some of this stuff on a little bit of more of a fine scale. The red ones are the red polygons are fires that have occurred previous to 2017. The yellow ones are the ones we saw in 2017. But looking at the cumulative effects, those are the things that really, we have a bad year. Yeah, it's tough, but we have to recognize that this wasn't the first bad year. Again, kind of going back to the slides that Alan showed, you could see that we've had years, and this is one of the worst ones. But those cumulative effects, unless we do something to mitigate them and trying to accelerate their rehabilitation, it can be hugely challenging. Another species that has a lot of trouble with, and these two are not the only ones. There's other ones that are less well known, things like pygmy rabbits that are also highly dependent on these sagebrush ecosystems and can have equally negative effects. But these are some of the couple of the big ones that people are really well aware of. Again, kind of looking at where the fires are occurring and looking at the habitats that are really important to our sage-grouse populations. Again, you can see not all of sage-grouse habitat was burned, but again, huge effects within our sage-grouse range. When we look at our priority habitat, 275,000 acres were hit within their general habitat, 311. So this, again, another 500,000 acres that are certainly having a huge effect on some of our game species. Just to put it in perspective, those sizes, 500,000 acres, that's larger than the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge itself. So just to give a real brief summary just on the wildlife effects and especially the game effects in general, for Nevada, we typically see wildfires being have deleterious effects rather than beneficial effects for wildlife. On occasion, they can be good, but it's not the rule. If we have specific conditions that are favorable for a fire, and so prescribed fires, they usually look for those types of situations before we'll initiate a fire. Those can be very favorable. They can generate good effects. It has to be extremely carefully done within Nevada's sagebrush ecosystems. And when wildfires are unplanned, rarely do they occur in favorable situations, and it's just to say that the conditions are undependable or unpredictable at best. I'll now turn the microphone over to Lee Turner and allow him to speak about some of our rehab efforts.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and the Commission. I excuse me, just want to spend a few minutes sort of explaining some of the process that we go through at NDOW in terms of how we address some of the fires and how we can address some of our treatments and spend money, get funds on the ground in the best way. I think Alan and Brian set up really well. We have a lot of fire, and 1.2 million acres would be, to put it kind of bluntly, impossible to treat every single acre of. So we have to make decisions and prioritize, work with the BLM. Largely the fires this year burned on BLM land, a lot on private. We work with private landowners to come up with how we're going to prioritize our treatments and how we're going to prioritize our limited funding. This year I'm sorry, there we go. This year, so this is a table that shows about 12 or 13 fires that we are expending the vast majority of our funding on, and this is partnering with BLM, partnering with some private landowners as well. I don't know the exact total, but I think we burned about 30,000 acres of private land in that 1.2 million acres of land in total. There was a great deal of state land burned in there as well. So we get involved with the BLM as fires are burning. Our biologists are involved in talking, what were the wildlife priorities in that particular burn? What are the habitat priorities in those particular burns? So even prior to a fire being extinguished, we're already moving down the road to determining, is that going to be a fire where we think we're going to expend funds? So we don't wait till this is all over, because that typically would be too late. We're right now finishing up our seedings. Into January and February is still, between November and February is probably the time you want to be doing all of the seeding work. So you can kind of see that we've spent about $1.9 million this year. We've got about 300,000 more in bills that haven't come in yet. So 2.2 million of funds going through NDOW will be expended. And I don't know what the total for BLM is, but our funds expand the footprint of their projects. We can work onto private land that abuts the fire that burned on federal land. We can work onto state lands and make that process a whole lot easier. BLM sometimes has trouble working on state or private lands. And I'm not sure where to put this in the talk, and we strive for a native seed mix. Native seed mixes don't work everywhere after every fire, and I think many of you probably know this. In our drier sites, we try to be much more pragmatic and practical and plant things like forage kochia, and there's a new variety of kochia called Snowstorm, which has got a taller stature. It germinates in drier conditions yet, so we've planted, I don't know exactly how many pounds we planted this year, but it's thousands, and we're going to evaluate the efficacy of using that Snowstorm kochia. We use non-native wheatgrasses. They typically will germinate in drier conditions, so we don't focus entirely on natives. We would like to get to where we have an entirely native plant community, but the reality of trying to get something to grow after some of these fires instead of cheatgrass leads us to making those sorts of decisions. I do want to call out a number of NGOs that made significant contributions this year, $340,000 total of the $2.2 million that we're going to expend. NBU Reno, NBU Midas, NBU Elko, Carson Valley Chucker Club, Battle Mountain, well, it's the National Wild Turkey, and that should be Federation, not Foundation, Nevada Chucker Foundation, Nevada Muleys, Mule Deer Foundation, the Woodland Village HOA, and Barrick and Newmont Mining Companies contributed $340,000 total dollars. And it's important, really important for two reasons. That's a direct contribution that goes to buy seeds. It goes to get seeds on the ground. It goes to help us directly with those efforts. But we can also take that $340,000 and match it to federal grants. And that could be anywhere from $1 of private can turn into between $3 and $5 of federal grants. So if we get $340,000, we will turn that into $1 million, $1.5 million of additional funding that we can use for other sorts of habitat work. So I really can't stress enough how important the NGU contributions are to our efforts, and I really applaud the NGOs that they really stepped up this year in a big way. Of course, down at the bottom we have other federal grant sources totaling $1.4 million. DreamTag, $250,000. That can also be used to match against federal grants. It's a non-federal funding source, and then the Heritage Trust for $66,000. And that's really key. I can't stress that enough. So I'm just going to talk real briefly about the fires that were in the western and eastern regions. And you saw the maps with numerous fires that covered numerous acres. And this is in the western region. You see 5 fires highlighted here. This is where we prioritized our funding and our efforts. Again, reason being, we don't have unlimited funds. I would love to have $90 million a year to work on fires. It's not reality. So we do have to make some difficult decisions. We prioritize within these fires. We look at slope, aspect, soil type, elevation, precip. What was the vegetation prior to the fire? What are the wildlife issues? Is it, well, and I'll talk about high priority winter range when I get to the eastern region in a second, but sage grouse, priority habitat, mule deer habitat. We take an enormous number of variables and try to come up with the best plans that we can come up with. And typically on a fire like the Long Valley Fire, I think we have 7 or 8 different seed mixes. So we're addressing specific places on the landscape with different sorts of seed mixes and different techniques for applying the seeds. Drill seeding, which is basically a big farm implement that you pull behind a tractor and it puts the seeds into the soil, is the best way. But once you get onto slope and rocky soil and things like that, you can't use a drill seeder anymore. You need to use aerial seeding. So there's a lot that goes into how we prioritize and how we actually get the seeds out there and on the ground. We leverage our funds with the BLM. Sometimes the BLM will give us money to hire the aerial contractor because we can use our good of the state contract and get more acres treated for less money. Sometimes they can get more acres treated, so we will transfer the money to them. We just look at the situation and figure out how can we get the most acres treated with the limited funds we have, and sort of ignore whose contracts we're using. Here's the eastern region, and one thing I added in here is the hot pot fire. You see that one in red at the bottom. It burned in 2016, and I wanted to add this because we're continuing work on that. And that's, you see it at the western edge of Elko County, adjacent to that Rooster's Comb fire. Brian mentioned sort of cumulative impacts. The Area 6 mule deer herd, that crucial winter range in Area 6 has had enormous impacts in recent years, and the last two in particular, that hot pot and then this Rooster's Comb fire this year. And so those are huge priorities for us, and we put enormous resources into those two fires and continue. We monitor the fires, we continue down the road. We don't just treat one time and then walk away. We do come back and if we need to apply herbicides the next year, maybe we got a lot of cheatgrass after the fire and some of our seeding wasn't successful, well, we'll put herbicides and then try to come back with additional seedings. So we do try to keep going with these things. And that was really what I had. I would be happy to take any questions if anybody has any, but that was the extent of what I had.
Questions from the commission?
Thank you very much.
Seeing none. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. With that, we'll close agenda item number 12. And before we get into the general regulations, let's take a 10-minute break till 11:05. These on, are they on?